You grind every day, hitting your runs, rucks, and strength work, but you're not getting any better, or at least your endurance isn't where it needs to be. This is where most guys are. They're training hard, but they're making little mistakes that add up and hinder their progress. As a coach, I've trained well over 100 athletes for selection, and I'll walk you through the top 5 endurance mistakes I see and how to fix them so you can crush selection. Mistake 1 is trying to do everything at once, and rightly, most guys know that they need to be well-rounded, so they stack their running, rucking, lifting, calisthenics, and swimming and try to progress all of them at once. The problem is, more is not always better. Just look at the chart. Your optimal training volume is not the most that you can recover from. In fact, doing more up to a certain point leads to less progress. And unfortunately, many of the hardest working athletes I see find their training is on the right side of this curve, where they're doing more work for less gains and never getting the results that they're capable of. So when I program for an athlete, I'm not asking what's the most this guy can do, I'm asking what can they sustain and actually improve from. You need to train across all physical domains, but you don't need to push everything at once. That's the point of periodization. There will be blocks where strength is on maintenance and run and ruck volume climbs. And then you'll also have weeks where you had poor sleep and the training volume and load needs to go down, or you need to introduce a rest day. The point is, you need to be training with intent, shift your focus when needed, and stop trying to PR every system at the same time. Mistake number 2 goes too far in the other direction, hyper-focusing on a single aspect of fitness while everything else falls off. You'll see guys overhaul their training for 6 to 8 weeks to build an aerobic base with just zone 2 running, and they get better at holding a lower heart rate, but in countless cases, they are demoralized when they retest their 2-mile timed run and they're slower than when they started. Aerobically they're fitter, but they've lost their fast foot turnover, their stride, and their speed. The problem is they neglected core competencies like speed work. When you're training for selection, you can never, ever let foundational qualities atrophy. This mistake comes from a misapplication of block training, where you train one quality at a time, starting with general competencies and get more specific as the competition event approaches. That works great in powerlifting, marathon, or short distance race events where the events are specific on one day and one or just a few events. That doesn't apply to selection. At selection, you're tested on the whole spectrum of physical fitness over the course of weeks or even months. So that's why I train my athletes across all domains all the time, and not training every domain equally, but yes, consistently throughout all of our training. This is so we're always improving, or at least maintaining in lower priority areas. For instance, running may not be the focus in our first training block, but you still need to run. It might just be 2 runs per week, one at a high intensity pace to maintain your 3 to 5 mile run, and then a longer run at a low intensity pace. The broader point is that you don't want to neglect any aspect of fitness in your training. Mistake number 3 is only training fresh. This is one of the biggest gaps I see in otherwise solid programming. Guys hit their best numbers when they're rested, so they want to train that way. But those PRs are performed under perfect conditions, which is great for testing, but that's not how it works at selection. Selection is one event after another, under fatigue, stress, and no resets between events. If you're not training under fatigue, then you're not preparing for what breaks most candidates. And this is where my concept called relentless endurance becomes a tool. Instead of always training for peak output, you start training for repeatable performance under fatigue. And what surprises most athletes is that this doesn't mean you need to train more. You just need to train how your training week is organized. The training principle here is consolidation. When you consolidate your stresses, like runs and lifts, or calisthenics and rucks, you can create a stimulus to the exact state you'll be in during selection, tired, depleted, but still expected to perform. And when you train that way consistently, 2 things will happen. One is you'll build a mental tolerance for moving under fatigue. And second, you'll build the physiological skill of recovering while you're still working. Here's the practical application. You're doing a lower body lift, squats, deadlifts, some accessory works, into a farmer carry circuit. But instead of taking the rest of the day off and hitting short intervals later in the week on fresh legs, instead, immediately after your strength session, you jump into those 400-meter intervals. So now you've taken that fresh interval session and turned it into a stress exposure tool without adding any additional volume to your training week. Now, this is a great tool, but you shouldn't do every endurance session fatigued. There's still a place for standalone strength and conditioning work, but if all of your work is done fresh, you're not training that skill of relentless endurance. Mistake number 4 is ramping up your volume too fast and getting injured or burning out. It happens most often with guys who are new to running or who feel behind on endurance. They see that gap between where they are and where they need to be, and they panic. So they double their mileage, they add a second rock, and within a few weeks, they're limping or sidelined completely. Most endurance injuries are not from a single bad session. They're from week-over-week impact that exceeds your body's ability to adapt. Specifically, it's because your heart and lungs improve in capacity quickly, but it takes a while for your joint, feet, and tendons to catch up. This is especially true for newer runners, and even more so for former swimmers, because they're exceptionally aerobically fit from all that time they trained in the pool, but their legs have never spent hours and hours pounding the pavement each week. This is why for many of my athletes, I include non-impact cardio from day one. We build volume without accumulating overwhelming damage with Zone 2 work on the bike, swimming, the Concept 2 rower, or even rucking on grass and trails. You can build that same aerobic capacity with far less wear and tear, especially in the early stages of your training. Even if you're injury-free right now, you might not be a few months in the future. So now's the time to examine your training and environment for points of failure that could introduce injury. For instance, when's the last time you replaced your running shoes? If it was more than 4 months ago, look at the soles. It's probably time for a new pair. Are you always running on pavement? If so, consider sprinkling in some trail runs or jogs on grass to reduce impact. Those simple adjustments will reduce the damage to your body and allow you to run faster, farther, and avoid injury for longer. Mistake 5 is neglecting the way you'll actually be tested at selection. Most guys separate everything about their training. They'll run in the morning and lift in the evening, and then some take it a step further and do what I recommended in mistake 3, stacking sessions back to back. And that's great, but at some point you need to get specific about your prep and start training the skill of selection readiness. And what is selection readiness? For the Army, it means long distance farmer and overhead carries with a ruck on, hard runs or rucks when your grip and legs are shot, and then also learning how to recover on the move in a fatigued state without stopping. You can and should build the core qualities of strength, endurance, and so on separately, but once you've built that base, your training needs to pivot to train those qualities in succession. The fix is what I call functional metabolic conditioning, and here's a sample session I use with a lot of my Army guys. Your 65-pound ruck will stay on this entire time. You'll start with a farmer carry, move into a front rack walk, then a suitcase carry, an overhead carry, a fast ruck walk, and then finish the round with a 2-minute slow walk. And I'll give my athletes a set period of time to do this circuit. It's simple, it's brutal, and it's effective. But you'll notice that I didn't pull these exercises out of a deck of cards like you do in a CrossFit workout. Postural control, grip strength, and upper back and shoulder stability are all common failure points at Special Forces assessment and selection. So in this workout, I want my athletes to feel themselves, getting to the point where their upper back starts to round, their grip gives out, and they need to persevere to the next event. Learn about the selection course that you're going to, and build circuits that are tailored to your strengths, weaknesses, and the selection that you're attending. That's what I do for my athletes. My bonus tip for this video is that you need to keep your easy days easy and your hard days hard. You might think you're being tough by pushing hard on an easy run, but that often means your recovery takes a hit and you're compromised for your next hard session, so it turns into a moderate effort. Over time, what happens is that everything starts to blur and become a moderate effort. You have no true hard sessions to improve intensity and pace, and then at the same time, no sessions to allow yourself to fully recover from the others. What you'll find is that the best athletes have true low intensity days and true hard days to drive adaptations. Get on a solid regimen, have the discipline to commit, and then execute. If you follow this advice, stay consistent, and train hard, you're 90% of the way to achieving selection-ready endurance. Leave your training questions in the comments.